All right, let's do some audience questions. We have some really, really good questions this week. The first of which is from Peter. Peter said, I've heard you recommend some behavioral economics books, but I know your background is in traditional economics. Can you talk about where you think reality falls between so-called rational economics and behavioral economics? Okay, brilliant, brilliant question. Traditional, classical, rational economics assumes that individuals and markets are perfectly and completely rational and not influenced by cognitive biases, by framing, by all sorts of other elements which would lead to non-rational decisions. So this would include, for example, some classic examples of this would be if you ask someone, you have two options. You have two bets that you can take. You can have a 52% chance to win $100 and a 48% chance to win zero, or you can have a 100% chance to win $50, right? The rational decision would be, if you consider the expected value of that bet, would be to take the 52% chance of winning $100 because the expected value of that bet is $52, right? This is just simple probability theory. The expected value of a 52% chance of winning $100 and a 48% chance of winning zero is $52 per bet. Obviously, when you have one bet, you will either win 100 or win zero, but over time, the expected value is $52. The expected value of a 50% or of a 100% chance to win $50 is $50. Therefore, a perfectly rational actor who is not influenced by cognitive biases and heuristics as described by people like Daniel Kahneman in the book Thinking Fast and Slow, would take the 52% chance of winning $100. But most of us realize that we wouldn't do that. I would probably just take the $50 sure bet.
Yeah, and especially because it doesn't really provide any insight as to what your financial situation is. So if you're in need of money, then you'd take the surefire $50 rather than taking a little bit more than 50-50 chance at $100.
That is another aspect where behavioral economics, which seeks to address how people actually make decisions versus this hypothetical rational actor. Another one of the examples that behavioral economics has given us is the idea that money, the same amount of money, has a different utility to us depending not only on our net worth at the time. $100 has a different value depending on what your net worth is, and thus you would not actually see the same decisions made about $100 by everybody, which would counteract the totally rational actor. What also matters is whether you're talking about a gain or a loss of that amount. And Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking work into loss aversion is also another way in which we have seen that behavioral economics reflects a much more real-world interpretation of rationality than so-called rational economics. Now, these are all super specific examples, right? And I encourage you to sort of read, and I'll probably recommend soon Daniel Kahneman's book. But my view is the following, big picture, okay, without just digging into specific examples. I think it's really important as a base to teach rational neoclassical economics, because in order to have a better understanding of how people really operate, it's good to know here's what the world would look like if people were completely rational as traditional economics described. It would be more tough now when I pick up a behavioral economics book. I have a much better understanding of it because I understand that this is in comparison to theories of rational economics. If I just jumped into behavioral economics, I would not necessarily understand why a lot of that writing is so important and relevant. So I am completely in favor of teaching, and I started my education in economics with traditional, neoclassical, rational actor, stock prices reflect all known information, blah, 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 blah. That was a great baseline for me. Mm-hmm. But my personal beliefs now are much more in line with the behavioral economics work of people like Daniel Kahneman and Dan Ariely.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that while we may be logical beings to a great extent, I think, honestly, we're more impacted by emotions than anything else. And if your emotions make you feel one way or another, that could completely influence you to act in a way that's just not rational.
there are so many examples of how framing affects decision making. If we were perfectly rational, framing would not affect decision making. And what I mean is, for example, people who are told to spin a roulette wheel, okay? And after spinning the roulette wheel, they are asked whether they would pay that amount of money that came up on the roulette wheel for a bottle of wine. Or another example is with, you take your last 2 digits of your social security number, which are random, right? Mm-hmm. And and then you're asked, would you pay that amount of money for a bottle of wine? And it's the same bottle of wine. Those whose last 2 digits of their social security number are a bigger number are willing to pay more for the same bottle of wine as people who have a social security number that ends in lower numbers. There is no rational basis for that. That is priming or framing. And these are endless examples. So I don't believe for a second that the rational actors of traditional economics exist, but I think it's perfectly fine to teach that to start a foundation for an understanding of decision making in the world. Really, really good question.